And we'll move now on to our final talk of the session, which is from Chengcheng Huang from the University of Pittsburgh, talking about propagation and modulation of information in the visual pathway.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Adam, for hosting this session. I'm very happy to be here to share my work. Okay, let's get into it. We know that visual signals passes through multiple stages in the visual pathway. In visual cortex, the information is processed in several cortical areas, such as V1, V2, V3, and etc., in a hierarchical manner. We want to study how information propagates across cortical areas, and secondly, how cognitive factors such as attention modulates information flow. Okay, so here we consider only very simple stimulus parameter. So that is the orientation of a gabor image. And here I show you trial average population frame rates as a function of the preferred orientation of the neuron. We know that it's well known that neurons in the visual cortex are selective to orientations. So the population frame rates would pick at the neurons that are most selective to the orientation of the image. However, we also know that cortical neurons are highly variable. So for one trial, you may get a population frame rate like the red dot, where for another trial, you may get a frame rate like the blue dot. Okay, so we want to measure the information content in the population activity with respect to the image. So here we use linear field information as a measurement to measure the information content. Here the stimulus parameter theta is the orientation of the image, and linear field information is defined in this way. So F theta depends on the derivative of the tuning curve function of the population, F prime, and also the inverse of the covariance matrix of the trial-to-trial variability. Okay, so this visual information measures the discriminability of the population activity with respect to small changes in the stimulus parameter, which is orientation in this case. Okay. So from the definition, we can see that the linear field information depends on two components, the tuning curve function and the population covariance. So there has been a long list of work in the literature that studies this problem of visual information in neural networks. Most of the models are parametric, meaning that they make assumptions on the function forms of tuning curve functions and as well as the population covariance matrix. And depending on their different assumptions, they often lead to different conclusions. So in some models, a correlation can be important for information coding, where in other models, correlation can hurt information. So it has been a meandering path in the literature and still not clear whether correlation is good or bad. So instead, we want to use a different approach. We want to study this information flow in a mechanistic spiking neural network, where both the tuning curve function and the population covariance are shaped by the circuit wiring. Okay, so specifically, we study a two-layer network. For the first layer, the neurons are modeled as Poisson units with Gabor filters, and so that gives them orientation selectivity. And the orientation preference are arranged according to a pinwheel map. And the second layer are modeled as a recurrent network of excitatory and inhibitory neurons. And the connectivities are ordered, has spatial ordering, meaning that the connection probability between a pair of neurons decreases with the distance. Okay. Okay, so here we can measure the information of the second layer, the information contents of the neurons in the second layer, and look at how the information depends on the different spatial scales of the connections in the network. Okay. Okay, so let's first look at the effect of feedforward projection width. So here I plot the field information as a function of the number of neurons we read out from the network. So firstly, for a small number of neurons, we can see that for networks with very narrow feedforward width, so that's the purple case, we'll have much larger efficient information than the networks with very broad feedforward projection width. And in the extreme case, when the feedforward projection width is infinity, means that there's no spatial dependence on the connections. Okay. However, as we can see, as the number of neurons increases, then surprisingly, all the information curves converge to the same level. So it means that the total amount of efficient information is independent of the feedforward projection width. And we also can see that they converge to a level that's very close to the input information bound. So it also shows that the network can be very efficient at transmitting almost all of the information. Okay, so that's kind of surprising. Then next we can look at what is the effect of recurrent connections. So for this case, we fix the excitatory projections and the inhibitory projection to be the same. So it's just spatially balanced excitation and inhibition. Then for this case, we can vary the recurrent connection width. So it's from the light color to darker color. And you can see that although there's a small changes in information for a small number of neurons, as the number of neurons increases, the total amount of information also is independent of the spatial scale of recurrent connections. And they all converge to a level that's very close to the input information. Okay, so why is that? So it turns out that for the parameters regime that I just showed you, the network is in the stable regime. So it means that the frame rate dynamics of the network is uniform, and it's without, with constant input current, it will generate asynchronous uniform dynamics. So in this stable dynamic regime, the network response are approximately linear in response to the input noise. And we know that linear information is conserved under a linear transformation. So therefore, it means that in this stable regime, then the total amount of information is independent of the circuit's varying parameters, and it's very close to the total input information. Okay, so then that raises the question that how do we modulate the total amount of information in the network? So for example, how does attention modulate information? So our stability analysis of the neural network suggests that we need to go outside of this stable region. So in the unstable region where the network can generate pattern forming dynamics. So for example, we know that when the inputs to inhibitor neurons are weak, the network transitions through a Hall bifurcation and generates wave propagating dynamics. So here shows you an example of the raster activity of the network. So each dot is a spike at that location. So this nonlinear wave propagating dynamics can potentially lower the information in the network. Okay, and previously we have used this wave dynamics regime to model the unattended states of the V4 population activity, V4 data. In this case, in the unattended states, the wave dynamics can generate low dimensional shared variability, and that also produces positive correlations among the neurons. And that's very consistent with the population response in the V4 area during the unattended states. And in this previous work, we model attention as a top-down depolarization of inhibitor neurons. So by just giving more input drive to the inhibitor neurons, we stabilize the network, and that quenches the first mode of the dominance mode of the shared variability, and also reduces the average noise correlations. Okay, then how does this affect the information flow? Okay, so we can see that indeed depolarizing the inhibitor neurons can improve information flow. So in this case, when mu I equals 0, the network is in a wave propagating dynamics regime, and then the internal wave dynamics reduces the information content in the network. And as we increase the drive to the inhibitor neurons, we can stabilize the network. Then we transition into the stable regime where the network is the most efficient as transmitting information. Okay. Then next, one may say that this modulation in information seems very small in percentage. So what about we propagate the information across multiple layers? So here is just a result of a 2-layer network. So next, we also look at a network of 4 layers. And each layer is basically layer 2 to layer 4 are modeled with the same spatial connectivity. They are all recurrently connected excitatory and inhibitory neurons. And then we can look at what is the information across layers. Okay, so first we can look at the unattended states when the network exhibits wave dynamics. So you can see that the information quickly deteriorated across layers. So this is layer 2, layer 3, layer 4. On layer 4, the total amount of information is already only a small percentage compared to the input information. Okay. Where in the attended states, the network is more stable, and we can see that much more information is returned in the last layer. And then next, we can look at the ratio of the information across attentional states at the last endpoint. And we can see that the improvements in information also increases exponentially across layers. Okay, so finally, let's summarize. I showed you that in the stable dynamic region, a network can transmit almost all of the feature information across layers. When the network loses stability due to either broader or weaker inhibition, then the internal dynamics of a recurrence network reduce information flow. And lastly, I showed you that the attention can improve information flow by suppressing the internal dynamics of the recurrence network. Okay, so lastly, I want to thank my collaborators. So this is joint work with Brent Storm and Alex Puget. I did the work when I was a postdoc with Brent. I also want to thank our other collaborators and members from the Doran group and also our funding sources. And thank you for your attention.
All right, thank you so much for that talk. That was really, really interesting. I love the, how you showed that it matters more as you add more layers. I thought that was a really beautiful analysis. So you have a question from Matthias Hennig. He says, maybe I missed it, but why would a network then go into an unstable regime in the first place? Yeah,
that's a very good question. So it's a kind of interesting. We don't have a clear answer. So why is in the unattended states we lose more information? Yeah, so it's possible we need some wave dynamics for other functional reasons. So for example, one hypothesis is that maybe the wave dynamics is important for strengthening the connections across long distance. So maybe it's important for plasticity. So we know that during the developmental stage, the retinal waves are important for shaping the recurrent connections. So that's a possibility, but it's still not clear yet.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. David Damaris asks, can you clarify the input? Is it the response of a single oriented receptive field or an array of oriented fields?
The input is just a one Gabor image. Oh, I guess I just stopped the sharing. Yeah, so
yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, the input is just a one Gabor image. And then the neuron on the first layer has Gabor filters. So basically, it's, the response is only just a one orientation. The input is just a one orientation. If it's clear.
I think that's clear. You can post a follow up if it's still unclear. And we'll one more quick answer. Can you use this approach to understand what kinds of computations a recurrent neural network might be performing? In this context, the recurrent network seems to merely lose information.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, so for this work, basically we don't have complicated computation. So we are looking at the representation information of the stimulus. So just what is the estimation capability of the inputs. So we are not trying to extract more complicated information. Yeah, so that should be very important to study if we consider specific computation to do to change the image, the information of the image. Then we may lose some information that's irrelevant, but return more important information. yeah, so that's the in future direction. Yeah.
Great. So we'll wrap up.